You're dating someone who seems independent, calm, maybe even a little hard to read. But then, something shifts. As soon as you start getting closer, they start pulling away. They go quiet. They take longer to respond. They avoid deeper conversations. You're left wondering, are they losing interest? Were the feelings never real? Or worse, is it me? I'm Jim Rome, and if this sounds familiar, you might be dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. And in this video, we're going to unpack what really happens when an avoidant person falls in love. Because here's what most people don't realize. It's not that avoidants can't love. It's that love triggers their deepest fears. Avoidant individuals often grew up in environments where vulnerability was punished, ignored, or unsafe, so they learned early on to protect themselves by staying emotionally distant. For them, closeness doesn't feel comforting, it feels overwhelming. And when real love starts to develop, it activates the exact thing they've spent a lifetime avoiding: emotional exposure. In this video, I'll walk you through the psychological conflict avoidance experience when they fall in love, how they crave connection but fear losing control. We'll talk about why they may pull away just when things start to feel real, how they express love differently, and what their silence actually means. You'll walk away with clarity, compassion, and most importantly, the tools to stop taking their distance personally. So if you've ever found yourself confused by someone who says they care, but then disappears, or if you've loved someone who seemed afraid of loving you back, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you don't miss future videos, and drop a comment below if this hits home. Let's get to the heart of what's really going on, because the story is far more complicated than just, they're not ready. Let's dive in. Let's talk about what really goes on inside an avoidant person when they begin to fall in love, because it's a lot more complicated than what you might see on the surface. While it may look like they're cool, composed, or even indifferent, the truth is often the complete opposite. Avoidant individuals do love deeply, sometimes more deeply than they even know how to express. But here's the catch. For them, love doesn't just bring joy, it also brings risk. And that risk is emotional exposure, something their nervous system has been trained to avoid. To understand this, we need to look at their early emotional blueprint. Most people with avoidant attachment didn't grow up in emotionally safe environments. Maybe their caregivers were physically present but emotionally absent. Maybe they were punished or shamed for expressing their feelings. Or maybe they learned early on that needing others led to disappointment, rejection, or loss. Over time, they internalized a powerful survival strategy: don't need, don't depend, stay in control, stay safe. That's how their nervous system learned to protect them. So when they fall in love, real love, the kind that involves emotional vulnerability, shared fears, interdependence, it doesn't always feel safe. It feels like a threat. Love asks them to open up, to let go of control, to be seen. And while a part of them craves that closeness, another part panics. That's why so many avoidant people will retreat just as things start to deepen. Not because they don't care, not because they're playing games, but because something in their wiring says, if you get too close, you'll get hurt. I once worked with a client named Lily, who dated a man with avoidant tendencies. At first, he was warm, thoughtful, and consistent, but as soon as they started having deeper talks about emotional needs and future plans, he became distant. He stopped texting as often. He'd cancel plans last minute. He told her he needed space. Lily was heartbroken, assuming he didn't love her. But what was really happening? He loved her so much that it scared him. Not because of her, but because of what love asked him to confront within himself. And that's the key. Their withdrawal isn't about you, it's about their internal conflict. They're torn between the part of them that wants connection and the part of them that equates intimacy with losing themselves. That tug-of-war creates behaviors that seem cold, confusing, or avoidant. But underneath is a scared, self-protective part that never learned how to feel safe while staying close. When you understand this, it changes everything. You stop seeing their distance as rejection and start recognizing it as fear. That doesn't mean you tolerate emotional unavailability, but it helps you stop personalizing their patterns. Because the truth is, their love may be real, but their capacity to feel safe in love is often still under construction. When an avoidant person falls in love, it creates a powerful emotional conflict inside them, a push-pull dynamic that feels just as confusing for them as it does for their partner. On one hand, they want closeness. They enjoy your company, feel drawn to your warmth, and start letting their guard down. But on the other hand, love begins to stir something that terrifies them: vulnerability, and that's when the retreat begins. This inner tug-of-war is exhausting for both people. The avoidant may not even understand why they're pulling back. They just know something doesn't feel safe anymore. They'll often say things like, "I need space," or "I'm just not ready for something serious," even after showing clear signs of deep affection. And their partner is left standing there trying to make sense of the mixed signals. How can someone go from being so connected to so distant overnight? Here's what's really going on. For the avoidant, emotional closeness activates a threat response, not because love itself is dangerous, but because love requires them to let down the very defenses they've spent their whole lives building. They're not running from you, they're running from the part of themselves that's afraid to need anyone. They're afraid that if they let someone too close, they'll lose control, lose independence, or worse, be emotionally hurt the way they were in the past. I once worked with a man named Jordan who deeply loved his girlfriend. He described her as kind, supportive, emotionally available, the kind of person he always thought he wanted. And yet, every time they got closer, he would pick fights, pull away, or ghost her for days at a time. He didn't understand it at first. But after working through his attachment patterns, he realized that love felt threatening because it asked him to receive care, not just give it in a controlled way. His past had taught him that needing someone made him weak. So even though he cared deeply, he shut down, not to hurt her, but to protect himself. Avoidants often express love differently. You may not get long emotional texts or heart-to-heart talks, but they might show up to help you move, bring you coffee when you're stressed, or quietly make sure your favorite snacks are stocked in the pantry. These are acts of love, love that feels safer for them to do than to say. But if you're someone who needs emotional communication and verbal affirmation to feel connected, it can leave you feeling incredibly lonely. You might wonder, why do I feel so emotionally starved when I know they care? And that's the heartbreak of it. The avoidant partner does care, but the way they love might not land for you in the way you need it to. This disconnect creates tension, especially in anxious avoidant pairings. The more the anxious partner seeks closeness, the more the avoidant pulls back. And the more the avoidant pulls back, the more the anxious partner panics. This cycle can feel impossible to break unless both people are aware of what's actually happening underneath the surface. For the avoidant, love means facing their own fear of intimacy. It means learning how to stay present with uncomfortable emotions instead of running from them. For their partner, it means holding space with compassion, but also with boundaries. Because you can't carry the emotional weight for two people, you can understand their fear without making yourself small to accommodate it. So if you're loving someone who seems afraid to love you back in the way you need, try not to internalize their withdrawal as rejection. Know that you didn't cause their fear. You simply triggered something that's been buried for a long time. And that's not your fault. It's their work to do. The best thing you can do is stay grounded in your own truth. Communicate your needs clearly. Hold boundaries with kindness. And remember, real love isn't about chasing someone who's running. It's about building safety first within yourself, and then with someone who can meet you there. Let's take a closer look at the behavior itself. What avoidant love actually looks like on the outside. This is where it gets confusing, especially if you're someone who values emotional openness and communication. Because avoidant individuals often don't show love in the ways you might expect. Their love can be quiet, subtle, and difficult to recognize if you're not familiar with their attachment style. And when emotional closeness ramps up, Even if it's healthy and safe, it can trigger protective behaviors that seem cold or confusing. Avoidants often avoid emotional conflict, not because they don't care, but because conflict feels unsafe. Raised in environments where conflict meant chaos, criticism, or withdrawal of love, they learn to associate confrontation with instability. So instead of leaning in to resolve emotional tension, they retreat. They go quiet, say, "I don't want to talk about this," or try to change the subject. Their goal isn't to hurt you, it's to protect themselves from a level of emotional intensity they haven't learned how to manage. They also suppress their own needs. That might sound strange at first, but it's actually part of the same pattern. Expressing needs requires vulnerability, and for the avoidant, vulnerability equals risk. So instead, they cope by over-relying on independence. You might hear them say, "I'm fine," or "I don't need anything," even when they clearly do. Over time, this self-sufficiency creates emotional walls that are hard for their partners to get through. It can feel like you're always knocking, but never fully being let in. And when love gets too close, when they feel deeply seen, needed, or emotionally depended on, many avoidants unconsciously create distance. This might look like canceling plans, withdrawing from physical affection, or suddenly being too busy to connect. In more extreme cases, they may even sabotage the relationship altogether. Not because they don't care, but because closeness makes them feel like they're losing control. And when emotional safety feels threatened, their reflex is to retreat, not to repair. A client of mine, Emily, once shared that her avoidant boyfriend was incredibly loving at first, planning dates, being thoughtful, showing up, but as they got more serious, his behavior shifted. He started making passive jokes about commitment. He became inconsistent with communication. When she brought up feelings, he'd shut down or tell her she was too sensitive. She felt like she was slowly being pushed out of a relationship that used to feel so promising. But what was really happening? His nervous system was reacting to the growing emotional closeness. His distance was fear, not disinterest. Avoidants can love very deeply, but their way of expressing it often gets misunderstood or misread. They may show love by doing things for you, by giving you space, by staying steady on the outside. But if you're someone who needs open words, shared emotions, and reciprocal vulnerability, their love can feel hollow or one-sided. This doesn't make you needy, it just means you're wired differently. Your attachment style leans toward closeness, theirs leans toward protection. And in that mismatch, it's easy to feel unseen, even when you're deeply valued. That's why understanding these behavioral patterns matters so much. It helps you stop personalizing their shutdowns. It helps you see that their silence is often about self-preservation, not about your worth. But it also helps you recognize what you need in order to feel secure. Because yes, avoidant people can grow. They can unlearn these patterns, but the relationship can only work if they're willing to do the emotional work. And if you're not sacrificing your own needs in the process, love shouldn't leave you guessing, it should leave you feeling safe. And that's something you're allowed to want and wait for. Here's the key takeaway that changes everything. The avoidance struggle isn't about lacking love, it's about lacking safety with vulnerability. That's a big distinction. They often do love you, but they don't feel emotionally safe enough to show it in the ways you need. For them, love brings up fear, not because of you, but because of what love requires: openness, dependence, and the risk of being seen, and maybe even hurt. This is why avoidants aren't necessarily doomed in relationships. With enough patience, self-awareness, and emotional maturity on both sides, they can absolutely learn to stay present with discomfort instead of running from it. But this kind of change takes more than affection or pressure. It takes emotional safety. It takes a willingness to recognize their fear instead of hiding behind it. And it often starts small, sitting through a tough conversation instead of shutting down, reaching out when triggered instead of disappearing, or naming a feeling instead of brushing it off. One of my former clients, Natalie, had been dating a man who leaned avoidant. At first, she chased. She tried to fix, to decode, to prove her love so he'd finally feel safe. It didn't work. But when she stopped over-functioning and started showing up from a grounded, emotionally clear place, something shifted. he began to open up. Not overnight and not perfectly, but the emotional safety she modeled helped him slowly realize he didn't have to shut down to stay protected. So if you're with someone avoidant or healing from someone who was, remember, you didn't cause their fear. You simply got close enough to reveal it. That doesn't make you too much. That makes you real. And the right relationship will never ask you to hide that. With the right support and shared willingness to grow, even avoidance can learn to love more openly, more securely, and in a way that feels safe for you too. Let's wrap this up with the most important truth. When an avoidant person falls in love, it's not a lack of feeling that causes distance. It's the overwhelming flood of emotion they were never taught how to safely handle. They want connection, but the vulnerability that comes with love activates deeply rooted fears of loss, rejection, or losing control. What looks like coldness or indifference on the outside is often a protective reflex, not a reflection of how much they care. In this video, we explored the emotional world of avoidantly attached individuals, their childhood roots, their push-pull behaviors, their difficulty with expressing needs, and how love can feel both magnetic and threatening to them at the same time. We talked about how they often show love through action rather than words, and how they may withdraw when things become emotionally intense, not because they don't love you, but because closeness feels risky. Most importantly, we reframed the pain you may feel in that dynamic by reminding you it's not your fault, and it's not your job to chase their emotional readiness. Your role is not to fix or convince. Your role is to honor your own needs, communicate them clearly, and refuse to shrink just to feel safe in love. If someone's love requires you to abandon yourself, it's not love, it's a pattern. And patterns can be broken. By staying grounded, emotionally self-aware, and open to secure connection, you not only protect your peace, you create the space where real mutual growth can happen. Thank you so much for watching. If this video gave you clarity, comfort, or even just a little bit of peace, leave a comment below. Share your story, your struggles, or what resonated most. You never know who your words might help. And if you're on a journey to create healthier, more secure relationships within yourself and with others, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and stay connected. We're building a community of people who are done with emotional confusion and ready for grounded, safe, real love. Because love should feel like something you grow in, not something you run from. And you deserve that.